I enjoyed the Netflix Devil May Cry anime, and you didn't because I'm not an overly sensitive anime gamer princess, and you are. So let's talk about that. And I'm just going to go ahead and get this out of the way. And hold on, let me get my earrings. Let me get my earrings off because y'all gonna fight me over this. Devil May Cry 1 is the only video game that I consider to be canon to the series. Devil May Cry 2, it's easy to just dismiss it and just ignore anything associated with it in terms of gameplay, mechanics, and storyline because the vast majority of Devil May Cry fans already do that. But Devil May Cry 3, I'm probably better known for my Devil May Cry 3 Dante Must Die perfect runs than I am with anything associated with Devil May Cry 1. Devil May Cry 3's story, while superior to 1, is just fluff to me, personally. Same thing with Devil May Cry 4 and 5 and the pachinko machines. Now, I'm going to go ahead and issue a spoiler warning right now, even though the franchise is close to a quarter of a century in terms of age. But my analytics for my Devil May Cry content has just blown up. And it does make sense that that's happened because Capcom pushed this massive sale in parallel to the anime's release. So a lot of people are checking them out, and they're being incentivized to check it out because of the sale. So if you're a new fan to the series, welcome. But I will be talking about the video games and their storylines. So you have been spoiler warned. Devil May Cry has a nearly 25-year history and has crossed into different types of media. Video games, of course. Spanning across 4 console generations looks good on a resume. We also have books and mangas, animes, since we're adding the 2007 series to the list, along with other oddities like mobile games and the aforementioned pachinko machines. These are the only Devil May Cry products that mean anything to me in terms of canon. Why these in particular and not our precious Devil May Cry 3? Because of Hideki Kamiya. And I assume you're looking at Beautiful Joe and have questions about its placement here, but I promise I'll get to that later in the video. For now, let's focus on Kamiya's significance. Kamiya is the creator and director of Devil May Cry who works for the video game publisher Capcom. In my last video detailing the backstory of Devil May Cry 2, and I'll link that video in the description, nothing about Devil May Cry 2 felt familiar. The combat, the animation style, not even the main character of the series, Dante, was familiar. My views about creators and directors and their ties to the intellectual properties they create might have been formed by my consumption of Devil May Cry 2. It simply wasn't an acceptable effort. You see, Hideki Kamiya wasn't the director for Devil May Cry 2, despite being an active employee in Capcom and in good standing. A new guy from Capcom Studio 1 was given the task for directing the game. Capcom Studio 1 was primarily a group of arcade game developers, and since arcade revenue was declining with no real recovery in sight, a director with no experience with console games or Devil May Cry context was given reign. In 2003, a younger and significantly less fiber-concentrated Devil May Asian was browsing online forums to find an explanation for why Devil May Cry 2 turned out the way it did, and tons of theories popped up. One of my favorite ones involved how a sudden need for a Devil May Cry sequel was needed, and instead of building the game from the ground up, higher-ups looked at early builds of games in Capcom Studio 1, came across one concept in particular, and proclaimed, "Put Dante in it and release it as Devil May Cry 2." It's kind of believable and a little fun to think about, but I have never found any sort of evidence to support that. So I continued to do a little bit of digging around to help me better understand why Devil May Cry 2 became the thing that it became. And I would eventually come across 2 different names. Shinji Mikami, Hideki Kamiya. those were the names associated with Devil May Cry, and they were no longer involved. That was enough for me to dismiss Devil May Cry 2 and any other Devil May Cry titles that didn't include them. Now, I can appreciate the innovations that the later games would eventually introduce into the series, but they still didn't mean anything to me in terms of story. Again, it was just fluff. My personal views on canonicity can be traced back to this game. Fast forward to April of 2025 and the Netflix Devil May Cry anime makes its debut, under the leadership of Adi Shanker. There are others involved, but Shanker is the focal point in all of this. Obviously, I don't consider the anime to be canon, but my wife and I did watch his Castlevania anime and enjoyed it. So when I heard he was driving the Devil May Cry anime project, I was indifferent about it. I didn't care much for the 2007 anime, but was hopeful that Shanker could make something entertaining from the series, like how the Castlevania anime turned out. And it's fine. He pulls from all Devil May Cry sources though, from the plasma enemy from Devil May Cry 1, Lucia and Arius in Devil May Cry 2, which was kinda crazy, Agni and Rudra from 3, Echidna from 4, Cavalier Angelo from 5. White Rabbit? Straight from the Devil May Cry 3 Dante manga. The Strawberry Sundae scene was a reference to the 2007 anime, which I never understood why that was a thing, and Enzo can be referenced in the Devil May Cry 1 manual and the Devil May Cry novel. And while we're talking about Enzo, he's also a character in Bayonetta, serving essentially the same role. And who do you think created Bayonetta? You guessed it, Frank Stallone, Hideki Kamiya. Since we're revisiting Kamiya, let's take a look at this game. Beautiful Joe, another Kamiya creation. It's a side-scroller beat-em-up, not like Devil May Cry. A very fun game. But Kamiya did sneak in a certain someone as a bonus character. You want to take a guess who it is? You guessed it. Dante. Beautiful Joe does fill in a plot hole that annoys a lot of us. In Devil May Cry 2, which I don't consider canon, the Rebellion Sword makes its debut. There was no explanation why Alistister, the primary sword used in Devil May Cry 1, didn't make an appearance. I can forgive not having Force Edge or the Sparta Sword since Force Edge was transformed into the Sparta Sword, and that sword was left with Trish. She came back to help Dante, but arrived empty-handed. As far as I'm concerned, those swords are lost when the island exploded. But I hear you, she didn't arrive empty-handed. Trish had the Sparta Sword strapped to her back in the last scene. Yeah, but Dante had Force Edge on his back too. Clearly, lore is complicated. But what happened to Alistister? In Beautiful Joe, it's explained. You come across the spirit of Alistister in a boss fight, and like all good fights, we need some dialogue to get things rolling. On a Wednesday, today Dante and I went out for some demon hunting. Dante spun me around like a madman, and then swung me into a marionette. Wham! When I smashed into the marionette, it really hurt. But he never apologized. Yeah, Alistister, you know what else hurts when some sword spirit mindlessly tosses his sword body around? My chest body. I'm still taking double doses of ibuprofen for that. Where's my apology, you drama queen son of a bitch? Alistister continues. Today was the day we were to set off to explore Somewhere Island, but Dante forgot to take me. He left me behind, all on my own. He didn't even send me a postcard. Alistister was ignored, and the spirit of the sword went to seek a healthier relationship. Regardless, the sword ended up rusting up, but not so bad that it couldn't be used in Beautiful Joe. Okay, whatever. Lore is complicated. Speaking of which, let's get back to Shanker and how he views Devil May Cry lore. He did an interview for Collider, and he has a very particular view of sequels and how they... Well, here's the interview. Devil May Cry has been around since 2001, and there's been a lot of video games, comics, there's been a lot of material. How did you decide what you wanted to focus on in the first 8 episodes? My process is completely intuitive, so I just kinda go with things. So any answer I'm giving is me intellectualizing and reverse engineering a purely intuitive process. I just kinda want to preface that. The first game, Devil May Cry, released in 2001, you have 5 mainline games, you have a reboot, you have a bunch of manga, you have a pachinko machine, and wonderful anime from 2007. You have live stage shows, but the truth of the matter is, these were all a series of retcons. So every time a new game came out, it was a retcon. And what I had was like the gift of hindsight, where I could just kind of look at 20 plus years of material and alchemize it. Or I came up with a new word today, cosmic editing. I got to cosmic edit, and you know, at the end of the day, Dante is still Dante, Lady is still Lady. These are the characters from the games. Yeah, we're meeting them. We're meeting younger versions of them than we would have met in the games. So I'm not really changing anything. I was just really almost like an archaeologist, excavating and pulling out this blueprint that was always there and bringing it to the surface to make it a cohesive cinematic universe. Every new iteration of Devil May Cry is retconning the previous media piece. I don't agree that that's how sequels work, video games, TV shows, or whatever media delivery, but he and I kinda agree that the video games aren't canon. Look, lore is complicated. He's pulling inspiration from the games in obvious ways, but the origin of so many plot points are radically different. Dante and Mary's initial first face-to-face. Dante's Devil Trigger awakening. Mary's motivations and Arkham's origins and relation to Mary. The anime, which I don't consider to be canon, isn't correctly pulling from Devil May Cry 3 sources, which I don't consider to be canon. But I can understand why fans would be very upset about this whole weird cosmic editing thing that's happening. Considering the cesspool of a game that is known as Devil May Cry 2, which I don't consider to be canon, the return to form with Devil May Cry 3, which I don't consider to be canon, was immeasurably impactful. And because of its return and the emotional weight that it carried for fans, especially for us early fans in 2005, I can understand why fans would be upset about this whole weird discrepancy thing. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter to me that the anime, which I don't consider to be canon, isn't correctly pulling from Devil May Cry 3 storyline sources, which I don't consider to be canon, because I don't consider any of those things to be canon. Now, I think that probably leads us to the most polarizing figure in the anime. And for those of you who might care a little too much about this aspect, I will be casually bouncing between Mary's name and Lady's name interchangeably throughout the rest of this video. So if that does bother you, criticism about Lady is everywhere. Everything from her attitude, her overpowered abilities to kill demons, and, of course, her origin and introduction that's not synced up with Devil May Cry 3's story, which I don't consider canon. And don't get me started on her Darkcom teammates. Gender-bending Nightwing, metrosexual Bluetooth douche, Darkcom Redshirt, Jamie Foxx Cyclops, and Kyle Pavlovsky cosplaying as a Frieza henchman. I actually don't have a problem with these characters. They seem like fine people. I just had these jokes and I couldn't find a place to put them in the script. So... while I was browsing around for specific pieces about Lady, I came across this Reddit post. I focus on it because it's well written and void of that classic keyboard smashing energy video game nerds love to showcase. He makes several points about the anime, but I want to zone in on his lady paragraph. Lady. I really hoped for better. I would have loved a lady-centered series. I still would have done right, but this isn't the lady from Devil May Cry 3 who is driven, emotionally complex, and absolutely central to the story's moral heart. This isn't the lady from the Madhouse anime, who, may I add, got an entire great episode focused on her, episode 4 Rolling Thunder. The Netflix lady is cruel, foul-mouthed, and stripped of everything that made her character work. Gunning down surrendered demons? Really? That doesn't make her edgy. It just makes her irredeemable. It's like they didn't know what to do with her, so they made her angry and profane and called it characterization. Not driven, emotionally complex, or central to the game's moral heart, whatever that means. I suppose witnessing the evolution of your father's descent into madness turn into a literal demon as Demon Daddy eats her mother alive in front of her as a child is kinda weak, right? How in the world are we supposed to know that anything related to that event would drive her to seek employment for a company that would enable her thirst for demon genocide? A company backed by government and military resources and leadership. And while we don't have a clue how long she's been with Darkcom at that point, we can assume her tenure was substantial enough to add in, for Mary's character, the complexity of patriotic conformity and how serving her country in a military environment left her unable to think through her decision while she incapacitates Dante, leaving him to nap alongside with Han Solo. And the criticism of Mary gunning down surrendered demons? I don't recall that happening, unless we're talking about the White Rabbit portal in the warehouse scene. And if that's the case, look at it from Mary's perspective. Suspicious human pops through a portal, says, "We're cool, just passing through," and suddenly a gigantic demon head pops out from the portal, doing its impression of Pac-Man. Yeah, I can understand the discrepancy. It's a tragic event, but even if Mary did participate in the slaughtering of the refugees, Darkcom background or not, it's still pretty on brand for Mary. And for everybody else complaining about Lady being overpowered, how she can't actually handle demons on her own, or could never hang with Dante in demon hunting, well, I can't help you with your selective memory. Because we all like to forget things when we want to hate something this bad, right? Look, I get the strong woman plot point equals strength and blah 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 angle. I get that angle is a cliche. I generally can't stand cliches. But where that disdain comes from is how, in this particular example, characterizations of strength happen for no reason, or insinuated through the power of quick editing cuts. Lady backstory provides that reasoning. Don't like how she turned out because of her last memory of her parents or her Darkcom training? I don't know. Maybe refer her to a therapist. Or find empathy, I don't know. Whichever is easier for you. If we're being completely objective, Lady's backstory in the anime has better legs than her Devil May Cry 3 backstory, which I don't consider to be canon. I mean, she gains the power of invincible motorcycle ramps through the power of daddy issues. And if that isn't it, I fear it's this weird, low-effort gatekeeping. Metallica fans had an issue with it in Stranger Things, and it smells like the same thing, given how Capcom ran a massive sale alongside the anime's release. My YouTube analytics are blowing up with my Devil May Cry runs, so the new fans are obviously there. And if it's neither cliche or gatekeeping, I suppose you just don't like Lady or the anime, which is fine, it's valid. Not every piece of entertainment is universally loved, and I'm going to say this without a hint of sarcasm. I'm certain there is somebody out there who cannot stand Mr. Rogers or Steve from Blue's Clues. I'm certain there's somebody out there. With all the distractions about Mary's character and Dante's strength, why doesn't he have Royal Guard? You forgot there were other aspects to the anime in the same way a lot of you forgot about Mary's childhood impact in episode 6. For all the criticism the anime got, a lot of viewers praised episode 6. Yet, you still ignored the context, just focused on the superficial. Did you even understand White Rabbit's origin? How, despite society's best efforts to find him a family, or maybe society's lack of effort, White Rabbit finally found family in Makai of all places? His efforts to rescue them from the poisonous environment that took the life of his demon sibling. When the portal to the warehouse was created, he was met by monsters in Darkom apparel. His tribe massacred in front of his eyes, not too dissimilar in how Lady's family perished. Why White Rabbit became a thing was made crystal clear. But you won't give Mary's character the same understanding? And there's more to the anime than just episode 6. Plasma was an unexpected standout character. His horrified look when he saw Darkom soldiers hovering over the corpse of his people felt very human. The emotional knee-jerk reaction of setting off explosives, killing those who participated in the genocide, taking his own life with an expression that, to me, says, "No world isn't worth living without my people." I might be looking too deep into the moment, but Plasma's emotions are visibly complex and dense. In the Makayan children, Darkom soldiers sending them mixed signals about their fate, the death of White Rabbit's demon sibling, and the visible impact it had on him. The kids sobbing over the perished body of their parent, shaking their lifeless corpse as if to say, "Wake up, you're not supposed to be dead." The way this anime made them so vulnerable made you not only understand White Rabbit, but sympathize for him, and depending on your moral code, you might be rooting for him. Devil May Cry might have always been focused on Sparta's lineage, but White Rabbit is the star of the season, and you guys seem to have a serious problem with that. Also, the soundtrack is incredible. My views of canonicity probably allowed me to enjoy the anime, which I don't consider to be canon. I'm not telling you that you don't have the right to be outraged by any artistic pieces. I took Devil May Cry 2 very personally, but I came out with a takeaway. My own personal definition of what story canon means to me. Allow me to apply the video game lore to this whole canonicity thing. The video game timeline has been established as 3, 1, 4, 2, 5. In Devil May Cry 1, Nilo Angelo was defeated, vaporized, and drops his amulet. That's the universal sign of rest in peace, he gone dead. That was the end of Virgil, as far as I'm concerned. Since it's a prequel, I can appreciate his presence in Devil May Cry 3, which I don't consider canon. His involvement in Devil May Cry 4 Special Edition is ultimately fan service. But why is he in Devil May Cry 5? He already died in Devil May Cry 1 as Nilo Angelo. Unless you're Adi Shanker, that's what makes sense to me. You don't drop a key item like that because of a jammed finger or a scraped knee. Lore is complicated. I'm not saying that you have to adopt my line of reasoning, but I have my reasons for digesting Devil May Cry media the way that I do. And I credit that for why I enjoyed the anime. And you didn't. And if you're still with me at the end of the video, and you're still upset about how they wrote Dante, or how they wrote Lady, or how they wrote whatever, there's a quote from legendary Marvel icon Stan Lee that I want to share with you. I'm going to paraphrase it, but it's about how fans would come up to him and they would ask, the question, who would win in a fight, X or Y? And of course, he gets bombarded, or he did get bombarded with all sorts of questions to the conceptual like that. But while it is mostly about conceptual fights, I still feel like this quote is relevant. He says, if I write a battle between The Thing versus Spider-Man, if I'm the scriptwriter, if Stan Lee is the scriptwriter, if I'm the scriptwriter, it'll depend on who I want to win. If he wants to write out that The Thing is going to win, he will write it like that. If he wants Spider-Man to win, he'll write it so that Spider-Man wins. These are fictitious characters. The writer has control. I'm sorry to break it to you, but this is going to be a reminder that Dante doesn't actually exist. The Devil May Cry world doesn't exist. Sorry. It's just an anime.